We've spoken about various psulim in mincha. For example, if it became chametz, or for example, if it didn't have the shear of soles, more than the shear, less than shear. We spoke about the psul of yotze, if the mincha goes out of the azara. Now we're going to discuss more of what I call the classic psulim, what we call a machshava haposeles on the part of the kohen, which is known as pigul. And pigul divides into two subcategories, chutz lizmano and chutz l'mkomo. In the case of chutz lizmano, we have a severe violation of pigul. If somebody eats the pigul after the kohen during one of the avodas has a machshava of chutz lizmano, he's chayv kares. If it's chutz l'mkomo, that's a lower echelon pigul. You're not allowed to eat pigul in that case. The carbon is possible, but it's not a chiyuv kares. How does this all impact on menachos? On the chachiv b'shah achas me'avodas hamincha shetia achilas hamizbeach or achilas ha'adam chutz lizmano nifsal ha'karba mishum pigul ve'ochel mimenu chayv kares. The same regulations of chutz lizmano that apply to a machshava during one of the four avodas of the zevach and generate a chiyuv kares of pigul, which passes the karma. And if someone eats the pigul, the basar, he's chayiv kares. Those regulations apply to a mincha as well, with regard to a machshava during the avodas hamincha of chutz lizmano. And therefore, if he had a machshava that this mincha will be eaten after the zman for the mincha, or the haktorah of the mincha, meaning the komets, will take place after the zman of haktorah, that engenders pigul with regard to mincha and a machshava of chutz lizman. V'imchishev al achilu shtei chutzim koma, nifsal ha'karban. And the question is, okay, the carbon is possible since the kohen oved had a machshava of chutz l'mkoma, but does it engender an isur in the achila of the carbon itself? Aval ein bo mishum pigul. And the Torah says in the Parsha of Shlomim, Vayikra Zayin, V'im he'achol ye'achel mibsar zevach shlomav b'yom hashlishi lo ye'rotze ha'makriv oso lo ye'chashiv lo pigul yeh v'anefesh ocheles mimena avonotisa. And the Chachamim now are going to darshan that this pasuk is talking about a machshava on the achila, but not on when he actually ate it, right? It sounds like when you read the pasuk, it says hanefesh al cheles, he ate it after zmano, that makes it into a violation. But the Chacham say, no, we're not talking about the achila b'fa'al, we're talking about the machshava of the kohen, that his machshava during the avoda was for chutz lizmano. Now, in the case of zvachim, in the case of a machshav of chutz l'mkomo, we find a different source in the Torah, and on that there's a whole sugi in zvachim that even in the case of chutz l'mkomo, we have a psul of pigul. We know there's a psul of pigul even in a machshav of chutz l'mkomo, but it's not a full-fledged pigul to generate a chiyuv kares. Now, let's go back to menachos. That's as far as zvachim are concerned. If at the time of the komets, when the Kohen did the kmitza, or even more critical is what we call nesina bikli, that he's got to place the komets after he does the kmitza into a kli shares, and then the kmitza has to be carried, transported onto the eish on the mizbeach. He had a machshava, the Kohen, almanas lechol es hashirayim chutz lizmano, or lahaktir es ha'komets chutz lizmano. Or, for example, he had in mind at the time of the Haktorah of the komets that he's going to eat the shirayim chutz lizmano. In all the above cases, we'll go over the three cases again. The mincha is a mincha psula, and that's a machshavas pigul of chutz lizmano. And if anyone eats from this mincha, he's chayav kares. So let's go through the three cases. Number one is at the time of the kmitza, he had in mind to eat the shirayim chutz lizmano, or alternatively at the time of the nesina b'kli, he had in mind to eat the shirayim chutz l'mkoma, or at the time of the holacha, he had in mind to eat the shirayim chutz lizmano. Or let's say, for example, at the time of the holacha, he had in mind that the Haktorah would take place chutz lizmano. Or at the time of the Haktorah, he had in mind that the Achila would take place chutz lizmano. In all these cases, we have full-fledged people. Im chishe b'chol elu al manas lahaktir olechol chutz l'mkomo, then the mincha is psula, but there's no chiyuv kares. It's only a violation of Allah. And all this is recorded in the Mishnah in Menachos Handaf Yud Aleph, and we have now, with regard to machshavas pigul, chutz lizmano, chutz l'mkomo, a mirror image between Menachos and Zvach. Now, with regard to pigul of a mincha, we have one very unique halacha. And that is, ein ha-mincha mispageles ela im karvu kol matira kidbina. You may recall that when we were learning here in this room Zvachim, in the good old days, we had a very similar concept in Zvachim, that machshavas pigul means that the carbon per se is kosher. Every single avoda of the carbon was done and implemented kidasu kidin, except for one where he had a machshav of chutz lizmano. The same thing applies with regard to mincha. The pigul is contingent on the fact that every other part of the avodah was done kidasu kidin, and therefore the mincha would have been a mincha kshera if not for the machshavas pigul. But other parts of the avodah were done on schedule with the right machshavos, but one particular aspect, as we mentioned before, the kmitza, or the nesina b'kli, or the holacha, or the haktorah, one of those was done with a machshavas pigul. Everything else was done with a machshava kshera. That's called pigul. If there was another reason why I would passel the mincha in addition, or shall we say irrelevant of his machshavas pigul, then pigul is not chal. Therefore, chametz osa, he did the kmitza, the machshavas chutz l'mkomo. So already at that moment of kmitza, the mincha is psula because of machshava chutz l'mkomo. Nasan b'kli o holich o hiktir b'machshava chutz l'zmano. which means that one of the other avodos was done with a machshava mefageles, which would generate under normal conditions a chi of kares if you eat it. Here there's no pigul with a chi of kares because already at the moment of kmitza, when he began his process of avoda, he had a machshava of chutz l'mkomo, and that itself passes the mincha. Therefore, ein kan kares mishum machshavas chutz l'zmano, shari benkach ubenkach hamincha psula mishum machshavas chutz l'mkomo b'shas kmitza. V'chein. Now he goes on to talk about very special minachos. He's got a case of what's called a minchas chote or a minchas knos. All of the above are minachos that are vulnerable, if I can use that word, to a psul with a machshav of shalom lishma. And then, in addition to the machshav of shalom lishma, chishev aleim machshavas pigul of chutz l'zmano. And the same halacha is going to apply. That since he had already a machshava of shalom lishma, the karban is possible and there's no pigul. So in addition to the machshavas shalom lishma, milvadzos chishev b'sha'achas avoda shalom lishma, and he has now a machshavas pigul in another one of the subsequent avodas, ein bo mishum pigul. V'chein im chishev lechel kizayis chutz l'zmano ukizayis chutz l'mkomo. If he already has a machshava of chutz le, it doesn't matter in which sequence, but he had a machshava vis-a-vis one kizayis that he would eat a chutz l'mkomo, that already passes the karban. His machshava of eating another kizayis chutz l'zmano would not effectuate, would not generate a status of people. Now the Chachamim say the following, and here we'll see a dissenting view of Rabbi Yehuda as recorded in the Mishnah Daf Yud Beis. According to the Shitas Chachamim, it doesn't matter which machshava came first, whether it was machshavas chutz l'zmano, machshavas chutz l'mkomo. There's never going to be kares with a full-fledged status of pigul because there was another avod. It doesn't matter when that avod took place with the machshavas chutz l'mkomo. Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, says that if he began with a machshavas chutz l'zmano, and later, subsequently, he had a machshav in a different avoda of chutz l'mkomo, then it does have kares. Why? Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the very moment that you had a machshav of chutz l'zmano, and that was the first of your machshava pusos, that already generates a chi of kares, which is not going to be undermined and neutralized by a subsequent machshava of chutz l'mkomo. Okay, now we have another sugya, which again is very common in Zvachim, but we're going to apply it here to Menachos. It's called a pigul bechatzi mati. What does that mean? At the time of the Aktorah of the Komets, the Kohen had in mind a machshava to eat the shirayim. So right, there's komets and shirayim. The komets has to be burnt on the mizbeach. That's called aktorah, and the shirayim have to be eaten by zichrei kuhuna. At the time of the aktorah, he had a machshava on the shirayim that the achila shirayim should be chutz l'zman. That itself would be a machshava of pigul. However, there was a second haktorah that was absolutely critical in the mincha, and that's haktoras halavona. Let's not forget about our friend the Levona. And at the time of the haktoras halavona, he did not repeat the same machshav of chutz l'zman. On the contrary, when he got to the Levona to clinch and complete the circle of his avoda, he had the proper machshav. that it should be eaten within its time allotment. Is Rabbi Meir holds that's pigul, because once he had a machshav of chutzes mano at the time of the aktar of the komets, that itself engenders a pigul situation, and we're not contingent on what his machshav will be later when he brings the levona to be maked in levona. And the chachamim say no, this is not pigul, because the matir of a mincha is the sum total of A plus B of haktaras hakomets plus haktaras halevona, and his machshav of chutzes mano was on a chatzi matir. The matir is A plus B, and he had a machshava of chutzes mano only during A and not during B, and that's called chatzi matir. The ein machsheves pigul ella b'shas hamatir kulo. If he had the machshava of chutzes mano during the entire entity of the matir, but this matir is made up of two parts, the komets and the levona. He only had a machshava of chutzes mano during one of these two avodos, and therefore that's a chatzi matir. Now, we're going to accept the sheet of the chachamim, and we're going to pattern him up from pigul, in this case where he only had a machshava aposeles of chutzes mano in a chatzi matir. But now the Gemara is going to waver back and forth about the scope of the Shitas Chachamim. Rav says that if hiktir es hakomets, the achar kach pigel b'levon, which means the following, that at the time of the kmitza and its haktara, he didn't have any particular machshava, which is fine. Shtika, he was quiet. He didn't enunciate any false, or shall I say, deviant machshava. And then, when he got to the levona, he had a machshava mefagelis, a machshava of chutzes mano. And in this case, we have a machlokus between Rabbi Meir and the chachamim. Rabbi Meir is machayev, it's pigul, because at the time of the aktaras halevona, even though it's a chatzi matir, he had a machshava of chutzes mano, and the chachamim poetry. Avol, says Rav, im pigel bekomets. If he started his pigul with a machshava of chutzes mano at the time of the komets, the achakach hiktir es halavona bishtika, l'divrei hakol chayev kares. Meaning, if you eat the shirayim, you're chayev kares. Why? Because Rav says that a pigul b'chatzi matir, even according to Chachamim, could generate pigul unless he has the proper machshava in a positive sense during the other chatzi matir. But if he had a machshava b'fagelis during a chatzi matir without any machshava at all, he was a jughead at the time of the other chatzi matir, so that he had in mind at the time of the aktaras hakomet chutzes mano, but at the time of the aktaras halavon, he had nothing in mind. Even the chachamim would agree, says Rav, that in that case yesh pigul b'chatzi matir. And that's the sheet of Rav, and Shmuel disagrees. Shmuel says that the Chachamim, even in that case, would paskin that there's pigul. I'm sorry, would paskin that there's no pigul because he only had a machshavim fageles at the time of the aktoras hakom. The Gemara tries to explain the sheet of Rav. Why is it that Rav insists that even the Chachamim would generate Pigul in a case where he had a shtika at the time of the Haktor Salavon? After all, it's a Chatzi Matu. Why would the Chachamim engender Pigul with a Chatzi Matu? Because the Machshava Chutz L'Zman at the time of the Haktor HaKomas. So the Gemara, in order to explain Rav, activates a new principle. And that is Kala Ose al Daito Harishona Huose. It's not the pshat that Rav insisted that even the Chachama hold that there's a pigul and a Chatzi Matu. No. This is a pigul bikola matu, b'mater kula. Even at the time of the Levona, he has a machshavas pigul. What do you mean? He has nothing in mind. But since we have a principle called Osal Daita or Rishona Os, that unless a person changes his original machshava and he has an explicit machshava to negate the first machshava, then even in the second avoda he has the same machshava. Again, we're not talking in actuality, meaning in a he has a latent machshava. It's a latent awareness of repeating the original machshava. So that according to Rav, the only salvation here for this mincha, when he had a machshava of chutz zman at the time of the comments, would be if he had a machshava bismana at the time of achila bismana at the time of the Haktor Salavon. But if he had no machshava whatsoever and he wasn't mafkia, he didn't cancel his original machshava, then kala otsal daita rishona kos. And therefore, it's considered as if he has a machshava mefagelis of chutz zmano even during the Haktor Salavon. Shmuel never accepted. Shmuel said that there's a fundamental difference between a machshava in a positive and an empty machshava. An empty machshava is just that. It is not a machshava mefagelis, and therefore he only has a chatzi mat. Now, my goal for today, I'm just trying to see if we could reach, if it's feasible. Let me just see. Well, we'll try it. We'll spend another few minutes and try to see if we can reach our goal. Now, according to the Chachamim, if he did have a machshavas pigul in a chatzi matu, which would mean either at the time of the comments or at the time of the levona, one of the two. So he had a chatzi matu. It's not pigul because ain't pigul b'chatzi matu, but nevertheless, it is what we call pigul without a chiv kares, right? It's like chutz l'mkom. It's a secondary lower level of pigul. And that means that the carbon, the mincha is psul. And here we have a major machlokes in the Mishnah. This machlokes is between Rashi and Tosfos. Tosfos in Masechta Zvachim on Daf Mem Aleph Amid Beis. You see how Zvachim and Menachos are almost like one. Is of the opinion that when the Gemara on Daf Yud Zayin establishes that according to Chachamim, if he had a pigul b'chatzi matir, it's pigul, just without kares, that is a rabbinic institution. That's only d'Rabbanan. Rashi says that it's min Torah. And Rashi says that if he has a machshavas pigul on the shirayim at the time of the kmitza, right now we said over and over again that the haktaras hakometz is mata the shirayim. He had a machshav of chutzes mano at the moment of kometz, but only as far as the shirayim is concerned. He didn't have in mind that we're going to delay the Ktoras HaKometz. No. We'll burn the Ktoras. I'm sorry, I said Ktoras, I meant to say the Kometz. We will burn the Kometz in its proper time on the Mizbeach. But he had in mind that the Shirayim will be eaten chutz l'zman. Rashi says he's chayav. This is a full-fledged eat. However, and I'm just going to tell you Shitas Rashi, I don't understand it. If he had the same kind of machshavas pigul at the time of the Levona, remember he gathers together Levona and does Akta. If that moment he had a machshavas chutz l'zmano on the achilas hashirayim, it does not generate an isakaris. Shekain, let's just hear how Rashi explains himself. Here we're moving on to page Tezayin. Mitzah shel hakometz hi avoda shlema b'fnei atzmo. Why? Because he doesn't have to do another kmitza on the levona. Levona remains intact. So therefore, a machshavas pigul has to be, in order to generate kares, has to be implemented, I'll use that word, during an avodah shlema, or alternatively during a haktarah. Kmitza is classified, says Rashi, as an avodah shlema, and therefore he can have a machshavas pigul at the time of the kmitza that's going to impact even if his machshava is on the achilas hashirayim. However, there is no mirror image or parallel to kmitza in the case of levona, because levona doesn't lend itself to kmitza. So in the case of levona, you begin with what we call likut ha-levona, and you collect the levona together, and it's in a klisharis, and then you do the aktara. But when you're collecting the levona, you're not doing a maisa kmitza, you don't have an avodah shlema. And therefore, if at that moment the coin has a machshav of chutzes mano, it does not generate a full-fledged pigul with an isur kares, because that's not considered an avodah shlema. And finally, the kmitza below likut levana comes along the Rambam with an unbelievable chiddush, and he says that's called a chatzimat. There's no kares, there's no pigul of kares. Meaning, Rashi holds that at the moment of kmitza, there's a critical issue about his machshav, because kmitza is considered avodah shlema. The Rambam, on the other hand, integrates kmitza together with the likut ha-levona, both of which now the kmitza and the levona will be brought and burnt on the mizbeach, and he needs a machshava of chutzes mano, says the Rambam, both at the time of kmitza and its parallel, so to speak, in levona, which is called likut ha-levona, when he gathers them together for the purpose of haktarah. And if he only had a machshava of chutzes mano, according to the Rambam, at the moment of kmitza, that would be chatzimat, and ein pigul bechatzimat, according to the sheet. All right, then. So let's just make a note of where we got up to here on page Tesla.